This is the reason why we can even remember anything. We have around 100 billion this in our brain, and they are the reason why even our memory exists. Without them, remembering anything would be completely impossible. Let me explain how it really works and how to make this process much more efficient. Of course, this is synapse, and we have two types of them, and they are completely responsible for remembering any information which we can feel by our senses. How it really works: synapses are created when we learn something new. For example, we learn new word in Spanish, in some other language, and new synapses are created. Do you think it's just one and this is binaural? No, absolutely not. To remember just one, even most basic information, we need at least few hundred new synapses. And this is very important information because in this way you can learn how to make your study much more efficient. The fact that we have to use at least few hundred synapses to remember a single information make a process of remembering and forgetting new information really complicated, because we don't forget everything instantly and we don't learn everything instantly, because it's more like a process. When few of our synapses collapse and stop to exist, we have still hundreds of more which code still the same information. And this is very important because in this way I can give you some hack. When synapses are connected into some bigger groups, it creates something which is called neuronal pathways. And these neuronal pathways works like building a new city. Do you think that building a city in the middle of forest, in the desert, in the middle of nowhere where there is no infrastructure around is effective? Absolutely not. And except China, or I don't know, maybe only China, nobody builds a city in the middle of nowhere. There is always something which needs to be around, like next to the other city which already exists, or next to the village. Extend the city, extend the village. Yes, it's a good process. And this is literally how our brains try to be effective and how our brain works. Because when you have already some infrastructure, electricity lines, pipelines, gas lines, roads, it's much easier to build some new apartments around than to build all infrastructure from zero. And this is how our brain also works. It is not effective to build new neuronal pathways from zero, from nothing, where nothing already exists there. But when already some neuronal pathway exists, it's much easier to build around that some new infrastructure, which are of course new remembered information by us humans. And that's the real reason why you need to try to associate everything with another information which you already remember, to extend your infrastructure, not just build new one in the middle of a desert. For example, when I want to learn how is a man in Spanish, it's of course hombre. I can, for example, imagine some hungry man because it starts with H and it's hombre in English, I would say this. So man for me in Spanish would be hombre, and it's reminding me of this hungry man. And I remember that hungry is signed like a man in Spanish and it's like a hungry man. So I will use some association with some very, very hungry man which is looking for food in the middle of Barcelona street, because Barcelona is Spain. And this is how I easily remember this word. It is like 15 seconds, but your memory pathway becomes stronger, new infrastructure is built around, and you already remembered this word much more efficiently than, for example, creating completely new pathway with some random shit. When I want to learn how is why in Spanish, it's porque. I remind my imaginary character Dorque. Dorque is a hero from my childhood book. So I, for example, remember my Dorque, which was a... And horse is just like very, very stupid animal, and asking everybody on the street of Barcelona, how are you? What happened? Why are you here? Why I am here? Why this street is like that? And this is how I remember that Dorque, porque is why in Spanish. Very easy. And if you want to create your association and your studying even better and even more effective, you have to think about creating even more association in different neuronal pathways. When you have one house in one city, okay, it's very good and it's very nice, but if you are rich, having just one apartment in one city would be very stupid, because, for example, then can raise taxes to 70% like in France, or I don't know how much rate there is, but it was 70% some time ago. So you move to, for example, Monaco, where still the taxes are around zero. So this is how it works. You have to create different neuronal pathways. For example, porque for me reminds also this vegetable, which is por in Polish. So I remember that I can have a por walk through city and ask all people why? And I can even imagine that I hear this very noisily and another neuronal pathways is activated and I have already some new infrastructure in completely different part of my brain. There is another thing which is really important and this is repeat all the time, because you see, our brain is kind of stupid and when we don't use some information, it will just think, oh okay, it's not important, and it will just forget it. That this is how our brain works. And in this way you can use something which is called LTP method, and this is like straighten of your synapses. Because in this way your brain thinks, yes, he uses this information all the time, so he obviously needs that. So we need to straighten these synapses which are included in this process of coding this information. And in this way he will have much easier access to use this information in future. So for example, your brain produces much more receptors to catch your neurotransmitter which is responsible to code that information, and in this way in your brain it just very quick process. It just happens instantly when you convince your brain that you really need this information, and this is why we do repeats. But repeating also needs to be smart. You need to use something which is called active recall, and you need to use it correctly, because when you remember some information and you try to remind it, you have very strong urge just to look into your book or look into your notes and just check what was that, what was this word, what was this information. But this is absolutely wrong and you should never do that. You should at least try to focus very strongly and try to remind anything. Because in this way, maybe some information which you will remind will be completely wrong, but at least you moved some parts of your synapses which were responsible to code that information, and you don't create new infrastructure from zero, but already use some part of the old infrastructure, and in this way, your synapses which are responsible to code this just straighten, and then you can, for example, check, okay, I was wrong, and you don't build infrastructure from zero, but just create some new infrastructure over this which was already meant to code that information. So you just used your same neuronal pathway, same part of your neuronal pathway, you don't need to create completely new one, and trust me, in this way, their remembering process will be much more efficient than just creating new and new pathway all the time.